had this report from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Qatar. Before I begin with the statement and read out everything for you in much detail, and of course elaborate further on that, or elucidate, as one of my followers advised me to use the word elucidate instead of elaborate. When it comes to Qatar, we've had many attempts coming from Israel previously to say that Qatar plays a very negative role. They've tried to apply pressure on Qatar to have pressure on Hamas when it comes to the ceasefire talks in order for Hamas to give up certain conditions. They likewise expected certain things coming from the Egyptian side, and the final attempt that we heard from Qatar came approximately a month ago. Now we're having reports coming that Hamas are being expelled from Qatar, and Qatar has had enough from them. Some people are saying these reports are not new. They were published previously, and so far from what we're receiving in terms of official verified information, that is not the case. That is not saying that's something that might not happen, or something similar might happen, but we haven't had that happening, and we've had an elaboration coming from the Foreign Ministry of Qatar. Here, they are saying officially, Qatar's efforts to mediate between Hamas and Israel are currently suspended. They added, Dr. Majid bin Muhammad al-Ansari, the official spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, said that the reports circulating about the state of Qatar's withdrawal from the mediation regarding the ceasefire in Gaza are not accurate, noting that Qatar notified the parties 10 days ago during the last attempts to reach an agreement that it would suspend its mediation efforts between Hamas and Israel if an agreement was not reached in that round, and that it would resume those efforts with partners when the necessary seriousness is available to end the brutal war and the ongoing suffering of civilians due to the catastrophic humanitarian conditions in the Strip, stressing that this context, that the state of Qatar will then be at the forefront of making every good effort to end the war and the return of the hostages and prisoners. Dr. Ansari stressed that in a statement to the Qatar news agency that the state of Qatar will not accept that mediation be a reason for blackmailing it, indicating that there are attempts to blackmail and apply pressure on Qatar, as we have witnessed manipulation since the collapse of the first truce and the women and children exchange deal, especially in the retreat from the obligations that were agreed upon through mediation, and the exploitation of the continuation of negotiations to justify the continuation of the war to serve narrow political purposes. This is a direct criticism and dig at Benjamin Netanyahu. The official spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs reiterated the state of Qatar's firm commitment to supporting the brotherly Palestinian people until they obtain all their rights, foremost among which is their independent state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, stressing the centrality of the Palestinian cause to the state of Qatar. Dr. Ansari pointed out that the reports related to the Hamas office in Doha are inaccurate, stressing that the main goal of the office's presence in Qatar is to be a channel of communication between the concerned parties. This channel has achieved a ceasefire in several previous stages and contributed to maintaining the calm until the exchange of prisoners and hostages of women and children in November last year, stressing that this context, the need to obtain information from its official sources, which is what we're doing at the moment, because many people rely on the tabloids, they rely on propaganda spreading certain rumors. So what we understand from this official statement coming from the Foreign Ministry of Qatar is that they are indeed suspending their role because they've had enough from Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel withdrawing, even though they did not mention Benjamin Netanyahu by the name or who's the side delaying all of these things. But it was clear, especially from leaked information coming from these negotiations, that they are talking about Benjamin Netanyahu Netanyahu. It's clear for everyone. It's clear for people in Israel and outside of it. And they are also debunking the news that were spread out and rumors about the Qataris expelling Hamas from Qatar. It doesn't really make a lot of sense anyway. Why? Because, like they said, the role of the office of Hamas in Qatar is to have mediation. The United States is interested in that. Israel, to an extent, up to a certain point at least, were interested in that up until Benjamin Netanyahu started to become more and more stubborn when it comes to the ceasefire, trying to impose his will and apply pressure on Qatar, including through very low ways to try and spew propaganda against Qatar. At one point, they were starting to say that Qatar is supporting terrorism, and although the United States and Israel had a lot of successes previously when it comes to negotiations through Qatar, including with Afghanistan and with other countries too, and with even kidnapped Americans abroad as well. Qatar is taking a step back. Who is filling this vacuum? And are they going to also be involved in Gaza? Here, in the following report, we have more elaboration. So the Israeli newspaper, Israel Hayom, they published this. And of course, you can ignore any propaganda as well in this report. It's just to further add information here. The emerging agreement with Lebanon. Hezbollah will withdraw. The Lebanese army will destroy infrastructure. All of the details. The IDF will withdraw from Hezbollah's first line of positions in Lebanon, which it currently holds, back to the international borderline. The agreement will include international guarantees by the US and Russia to prevent the rearmament of Hezbollah. In any case of violation of this agreement, the IDF must act in response. The minister, Ron Dermer, went to Russia and then the USA. This was to close the last details. So we've had information before about Russian participation, including Russian messages being sent to Israel and certain communications happening there. We had an instance before where Hamas asked that Russia, China, and Turkey be added as guarantors to the potential agreement when it comes to a ceasefire with Gaza, because from their perspective, the United States was Israel and Israel is the United States. It's not like they are trying to actually reach a ceasefire, but trying to buy Israel time in the form of the United States delegation to the ceasefire talks. And they have been only trying to get what's good for Israel. Although we've had at one point the United States, well, in the words of Joe Biden himself, reaching an understanding and declaring it. Hamas accepted the ceasefire previously, but we all know who refused the ceasefire. It was Benjamin Netanyahu. Here in this report, they said that the agreement in question will include international guarantees by the US and Russia. The fact that we are adding Russia as a guarantor is exceptionally important. Russia was previously completely out of the equation because of their situation with the United States of America and because of Israeli objection. Israel does not view Russia as a side that can bring it whatever it wants to the highest levels. That's why they only wanted the United States, and they were applying pressure on Qatar and on Egypt to further pressure Hamas to submit to the Zionist will. In this framework, they added, Syria will be responsible for preventing arms transfers from its territory to Lebanon, contrary to the situation that prevailed in the years before the war. This is also something very important when you're talking about Syria. Syria plays a very crucial role when it comes to the transferring of weapons to Hezbollah, and part is a very important part when it comes to the resistance fronts, especially with the freedom of movement that we have of many resistance movements inside of Syrian territories, including coordination. We've had previous reports of military drills that included Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah on Syrian soil. The report added, in any case of violation to the agreement, whether by the rearming of Hezbollah or the organization's military damage to Israel or Israelis, the IDF has the right to act against the violation or in response to it, and the activity is anchored in international backing. Israel Hayom also learned that Minister Ron Dermer went to Russia, as was published on the IDF radio, and then to the United States of America. This was to finalize the final details of the agreement. Among other meetings, he is also expected to meet with President-elect Donald Trump. Dermer is expected to present Trump with the main points of the apparent ceasefire arrangement on the Lebanese front. He will also present him with the latest developments in the Iranian nuclear program and the fear in Israel that Iran will soon break through to the bomb. It should be noted that Trump said during the election campaign that the last thing you can agree to is that Iran will have a nuclear bomb. As a reminder, last night, Saturday, a political official confirmed to Israel Hayom that there is a real progress in the talks for a political settlement in the Northern Front. According to him, this is a very good agreement for Israel that optimally meets its interests and that the progress regarding it is very real. On the other hand, the same party refused to provide details about the content of the agreement. Another new thing here, apart from the participation of Russia and Syria too, is the involvement of Donald Trump. Donald Trump was not involved in the ceasefire talks, and now clearly, according to this report, Ron Dermer is providing feedback to President-elect Donald Trump when it comes to the ceasefire, meaning Donald Trump is already in the picture when it comes to the ceasefire, and his presence is a potential translation to the fact that Russia is in and the fact that we are having some sort of progress, at least when it comes to these reports. What does this mean? And do the contents of this report mean that there is superiority for Israel when it comes to the ceasefire? No. Israel is publishing that to cover up the fact that they are facing a massive military failure in Lebanon, to cover up the fact that they are withdrawing from many parts of Lebanon, and the fact that they cannot reach any of their objectives in Lebanon. At one point, they were saying that we want to completely destroy Hezbollah, we want to dismantle Hezbollah, but the only thing that we're seeing is retreat from Israel. Israel has over 5 divisions on the Lebanese borders, enough to reach Beirut. However, Hezbollah's fierce resistance on the borders is proving to be a very difficult task for Israel to beat these forces in that area. And Israel has to save face with certain reports that it will be good for Israel just to cover up the fact that they are getting out of the mud in Lebanon, or trying to get out of the mud in Lebanon. Another question arises here that many people would be interested in. Will this include Gaza? So far, according to the reports, we're only talking about Lebanon. However, Lebanon, or the Lebanese front, when it comes to Hezbollah, tied itself with Gaza. Hezbollah started to participate with Al-Aqsa flood from the 8th of October. They had no prior knowledge. They were asked to participate alongside other fronts by the top figures in Hamas who declared Al-Aqsa flood, and they indeed participated in a very limited way to show solidarity, to show support, nothing too big. And their main objectives that they declared many times, likewise with Yemen and the other fronts too, is that they want to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. And if they reach a ceasefire with Gaza, Hezbollah will automatically stop. So Are we looking for something that will exclude Gaza? It's very unlikely, but there is something very important here. Hezbollah told them, we will not be committing to anything. And of course, this report is coming from Israel. Hezbollah said, we will not be confirming our position regarding anything up until Israel stops the war in Lebanon. So they will not elaborate on anything else. And it is very unlikely that we will see a situation where Hezbollah will have a certain agreement with Israel where Gaza is excluded. And we have many indications to show that both paths of ceasefire or ceasefire attempts, what is described as the ceasefire attempts, are linked to Gaza. Why? Because at the same time that Amos Hochstein and the United States delegations were going to Lebanon, they were also going to Egypt, and they were also in Doha to discuss the ceasefire with Gaza. And we had elaboration and statements coming from officials in the Palestinian resistance, representatives of the Palestinian armed forces, saying that we haven't had anything that is serious to a level where we can see a ceasefire coming. However, the point is both routes of ceasefires are tied, and we have evidence from the ground to show that both of them are indeed tied. Is there going to be a definite progress? That's something that no one can confirm. We've had, like we said before, many cases where we had optimism, where we had a hopeful situation. The United States was talking about positive vibes. However, nothing happened when it comes to that. So we are going to have to wait and see what happens when it comes to the progress, and then we will only be able to say that there is something indeed happening. But these are the reports that are coming from Israel alongside other attempts when it comes to Gaza. Very important developments, especially when it comes to the Syrian participation, the Russian participation as a guarantor, which means, by the way, Israel and the United States gave up a lot if Russia is being involved, potentially also to fill the gap of the Qataris suspending their role because they've just had enough with Benjamin Netanyahu. And Russia, of course, has way more leverage than Qatar, in particular when it comes to the United States and Ukraine. Moving on to the next subject, we have had a very significant improvement when it comes to Iran and Saudi Arabia. In 2023, China brokered a deal that Oman participated in as a mediator to have a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. They've had many years, 7 years, fighting in Yemen. Iran was supporting the opposing side to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was backed by the United States administration and other countries too. And China came in and had a very historic agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. China always tries to play a role where they can calm things down, unlike the roles that are played by the United States administration and its proxies in Europe and globally. And they were successful. That deal also included Ansarullah in Yemen. The United States tried to apply pressure on Saudi Arabia to apply pressure on Ansarullah in Yemen during this genocide so that Ansarullah can lift their blockade of the genocide entity. But that also failed, despite the fact that we have a genocide coalition, well, a very small, mini genocide coalition with the United States Armed Forces and the British Armed Forces in the Red Sea, trying to limit the scope and level of Ansarullah and their operations in the Red Sea. But that to this day is a massive failure as well, although they are conducting operations and acts inside of Yemeni territory, not just in the Red Sea. We also saw the Saudis participating in military drills that included Pakistan and Iran. And we also had reports about Saudi Arabia being invited to join a naval drill with Iran. And now we have even more progress. What do we have now? Well, we have this. Leading Iranian Saudi generals hold talks in Tehran. The top military figures in Saudi Arabia and Iran are having a meeting, hugs and kisses, and they are talking about continued development of relations. This is something extremely significant. You're talking about countries that traditionally hold hostile approaches when it comes to their roles in the region. But now we are seeing a level of progress, although we have the United States trying to take it the other way and Israel trying to reach a deal with Saudi Arabia. So this report came in Tehran Times saying that leading a distinguished military delegation, Lieutenant General Fayyad bin Hamid al-Ruwaili, chief of the General Staff of the Saudi Armed Forces, arrived in Iran on Sunday. During the discussions with Major General Mohammad Hussein Baghari, the Chief of Staff of the Iranian Armed Forces, the two generals addressed a variety of topics focused on expanding defense diplomacy and fostering stronger ties between the two countries. Major General Baghari extended an invitation to Saudi Arabia for participation in a naval exercise. They're mentioning it again here, stating, "We welcome the participation of the Saudi Arabian Navy in next year's Iranian naval exercise, whether by sending naval units or joining as observers." General Fayyad bin Hamad al-Ruwaili responded, "The Beijing agreement offers a strong basis for strengthening bilateral cooperation, and we see it as a strategic opportunity for both nations." Again, this is in line with the deal that was brokered by China. This meeting comes in the wake of the landmark agreement reached in March 2023, when Iran and Saudi Arabia, under a Chinese brokered initiative, decided to restore diplomatic ties. A key element of this agreement includes the implementation of a security cooperation pact, signaling a new era of collaboration between two influential nations. In a previous discussion last year, Baghari spoke by phone with Saudi Arabia's defense minister, Prince Khalid bin Salman Al Saud, to examine regional dynamics and strengthen defense collaboration between the two nations. The Iranian Major General and the Saudi Arabian defense minister engaged in discussions on crucial issues facing the Muslim world, emphasizing the importance of unity. They extended invitations to each other to visit their respective countries, reflecting a commitment to fostering closer relations. This is indeed a very important development. Like I said, you're talking about countries that were de facto fighting, especially when it comes to the Yemeni front. And after Saudi Arabia was one of the countries, alongside the UAE and Qatar, banning any sort of action being taken against Iran from their territories by the United States or by Israel. Now we have more coordination coming from Saudi Arabia and Iran, and this is very important for the region and the stability and the prospect of peace moving forward. Which leads me to the final thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Israel, they always cry. They commit the worst crimes against humanity and they cry. They commit a genocide and they cry. They commit every horror under the sun and they cry that we're the victims and we're defending ourselves and the people hate us and. And one thing that they complain about very heavily is the falsely labeled term anti-Semitism, which is supposed to be anti-Judaism, because anti-Semitism is a term that started to become commonly used in the beginning of the 20th century, following the establishment of Zionism, and as an attempt to link a religious group of people to a state, therefore trying to ban criticism of that state under that role, let alone the fact that we are talking about imposters. But they complain about it. And now we have polls coming in the United States. So what are these polls talking about exactly? Okay. nearly a quarter of Americans believe Hitler was a good person. Most Americans think Hitler was a bad person at 65%, with majorities across the party lines, with Democrats at 75%, Republicans at 60%, and independents at 59%. According to YouGov poll published on November 4th, the poll surveyed 1,077 Americans on November 1st about a range of topics, including gender, race, education, the 2020 election turnout, presidential vote, baseline party identification, current voter registration status. Most of them think Hitler was bad, but there's a chunk that think he was good. Mm-hmm. And they also spoke about, of course, Trump and other matters as well. How comes nearly a quarter of Americans believe now that Hitler was a good person? And how comes there are more talks against the Jewish people as Jewish people? Not just talking about Zionists and not just talking about Israel as a state. Well, the answer is very simple. You have, and we are being factual here about what's actually happening. You are talking about a country in the form of Israel, calling itself a Jewish state, committing the worst crimes under the sun. The worst crimes under the sun in the name of the Jewish faith. They use Jewish slogans, they use biblical quotes, and they call themselves God's chosen people, committing a genocide with the worst crimes against humanity, against the Palestinian people and other people in the region. Now, although it is exceptionally important to differentiate between the people who are talking in the name of the religion, Zionists, who try to ethnicize Judaism, and Judaism as a religion. If you want to have a certain debate about religion, what's right, what's wrong in that religion, which sect we're talking about in that religion, it's a perfectly legit thing to discuss and debate. But we're talking about something bigger here. We're talking about having discrimination against people for their religion, and the anti-Jewish sentiment is rising because you have a state talking in the name of Judaism and committing all of these crimes. They are crying about the fact that people criticize their state, although the vast majority of people who are anti-war, who call for human rights, are people who simply believe in equal human rights. They don't have something against a certain group of people, myself included, and I always talk about this subject and highlight how important it is to differentiate between the religion, any religion, and people who talk on behalf of the religion, religious establishments, states who call themselves religious, or religious organizations. Because you cannot have a certain view on the whole or the entirety of a certain religion by actions being taken by certain groups. That is not the solution. The solution is to differentiate and to hold anyone to account, hold them accountable, the people who are actually committing the crimes. Yet, despite all of that, and despite all of those efforts, and despite those efforts coming from myself personally, and I totally disagree with any type of religious-based discrimination or racism, we are having polls like this, and it's becoming more and more difficult for people to differentiate between what Zionist Israel is doing as a state, talking in the name of Judaism, and the Jewish people. This is something alarming. This is something that is negative. However, it's very important to add that this is something that's happening as a cause of Israel's actions. They are talking on behalf of Judaism. They are calling themselves a Jewish state. They are proudly repeating that they are the only Jewish state, and with all of that, committing all of the worst crimes under the sun and being proud about them and bragging about them, and then crying that people are criticizing them. The solution is not to have this discrimination and to have a general total approach against people. I firmly stand against that, and I believe that this is wrong. However, polls like this and ideas like this are a prime example on why Israel is the worst thing that has ever happened to the Jewish people in history.